Hello folks, and welcome to the channel, or welcome back. And I guess if you're watching this video, you're one of those people that dreamed about racing with a classic car on a racetrack. And like so many of us, this always seemed to be out of reach, but reality is that nowadays you can actually do competition racing with a classic car as long as you select the right class of racing. So depending on which class you want to race, it is always good to check your national sports organizations to make sure that actually you have the class that you want to race in exists in your country. Now where I live, and that is in Europe, we've got the FIA, which is an overarching organization, and they have made up a grouping of all these different classes, but they also tell you what is allowed to be modified on the car and what is not allowed to be modified on the car, and what you must do depending on the class you're going to race in. And this is all specified in Appendix K. So I really recommend, before you make a decision to go racing, have a look at Appendix K on the different classes and see what is allowed and not allowed on the cars. It is important because it's going to have a big influence on the cost, the running cost, but also the O&M cost of the car and the procurement cost of the car. I decided to go for the Triumph GTS class, competition class, which is the GT class. And in that class, limitations are really onto the mods that you can do on the suspension, on the engine, and so on. So you will compete with other people, but almost with standard cars, with of course some modifications on it, because you will have to have a full roll cage in it and other things. You can still do a lot of things, but you cannot go crazy. You cannot put a supercharger on your car, for instance. And that's what makes it affordable. So check that out, what is possible where you live. So once you decided in which class you want to race, it is time to start looking for a car. And these race cars, they come in two types. And I'm talking about classic race cars. They come either in the race-ready version, and you're going to pay lots of money for that, and they come in the retired version. And the retired version is a race car that used to race but is now been stopped with racing maybe a year, 2 years, 3 years ago. And typically they have some problems, right? They were not powerful enough, they had a crash maybe before, they have a lot of expenses on it to get it back into the proper condition. So those you can get for a cheaper price. So depending on what kind of a person you are, if you're just a pilot, then I would go for a race-ready car. If you are a mechanical skilled person and you're also going to race, then why don't you do your own repairs, your own maintenance and all that, and race at the same time. Both are a lot of fun. And that way you can buy a much cheaper classical race car. So now that we decided in which class we want to race, we can start looking for a specific car. And again, we can look for a race-ready car, or we can look for a classic race retired car. I went for the retired car because I like mechanics, I like to work on cars, and I like to race, so I like both. And I know I can save some money on the classic race car if I go for a retired car. So I'm going to ask Mr. Google to find me one, and I did. And once you find that car, it's time to start asking some questions. A classic race car should have some form of history. If it doesn't have no history in racing, then it's certainly not a classic race car. It's probably somebody who built it in his garage and thinks it is a race car. So always ask for paperwork. And on the car that I got, which is an MGB GT, a 4-cylinder, I have all the documentation collected from the seller that talks about the FIA approval, that talks about the races it participated in. I have a lot of builds, even from the engine build, and most of all, you need to ask for a dyno sheet so you know exactly how much horsepower this car develops, because it tells you a lot. And ask for a recent one, not one from 5 years ago, especially not if the car was retired. Now don't worry guys, I'm not going to stick with paperwork alone in this video. We will go and check the car out in a few minutes. But first of all, a little bit more about the paperwork, because I think you should ask for it. So the car that I picked up was an MGB GT, and it has its actual approval from Autosport in Switzerland, and that's the one right here. And I have a TC Class D1 and a approval of a TC 135. In other words, this car is allowed to race into the Triumph and GT class, and it's kind of approved as well with a stamp here. And this is the kind of stuff you really want to see with the car, because then you know it has been prepped and it meets the FIA Appendix K. There may be some small variations on that depending on which class you're running. They may make some exceptions, but that's important to have. So you should have some form like this. You should also have another form if you got this car at some time, which is kind of an export form or something like that. Because sometimes these cars come from abroad, and if you don't have that one, they may not allow you even either. Although it's not running on the street itself. So here I have more stuff actually about the car. And I have a whole bunch of race records. But what is important is to have a dyno, and here is the dyno sheet of this car. And it's been tested fairly recently, and you can actually see on the curves that we are having about 150 horsepower on that engine. So we know it's been prepped fairly well, and this is the dyno result. So if you go in for your car, make sure that you do get a dyno result. I also have a whole bunch of files here, which are results of races. And look, these were all the races the car has participated in. And the car always had number 99. And the owner was, well, is known as well, but I'm not going to talk about his name. But in all these races, this car participated, and here I have number 99, the MGB GT, a little bit at the end. In most of the races, he ended midway or all the way on the end. So that tells a bit about the performance on the car, but maybe it was also the driver. So I have a whole bunch of records where the car had been racing over the last couple of years, and as you can see, that is a hell of a lot, and it just goes on and on and on. It went to Dijon Motorsports, it went to Francorchamps, as you can see, it went to Spa, all kind of track records that I have with this car. I also got a whole bunch of video clips that I found on this car, and that is important to have. In fact, the funny part is that I even got the medical results of the pilot itself, because you will need a license. So I even got the poor guy's cardiogram. I'm not going to expose his name, but you know, this is kind of funny. But this is kind of how accurate this guy was, by collecting all that information. And then finally, I have the whole history of the car before it was a race car on the MOT. All these different pages here. And then all the parts that were put onto the car, as you can see, all the expenses that have been done to upgrade and improve the car. This is the kind of file you really want to have with any classic race car that has some history to it. If you don't have this one, then you should really suppress the cost of that one, because it means that somebody just built it in its garage and it never participated in anything. I also have an interesting piece here, which is probably the last race that number 99, which is the number on the car, participated in the Dijon racing event. And it has actually still the pit lane team passes, as you can see, and the competition sports parking lot. The car did not participate anymore in that race. It was put aside. It was planned for it, but it did not. If the car has no paperwork, has no video clips of races, has no pictures of races, then I think the price should go down quite a bit. If the car has a lot of history, then the price can be a bit higher. So now you're probably going to ask me, how much should you pay for a classic race car? So let's have a look. So here it is, the MGB GT from 1979, as I collected it from the guy who sold it to me. And the first thing that you of course see is that the car has been lowered. If you look on the headlights, then we can see that it's been protected with a dome, a plastic dome. So in other words, if the headlight would break, then the glass cannot fall out and it doesn't get on the track. If you don't have this protection, then you have to tape off the headlight with some black tape in a cross, and I'm sure you've seen all that on races. So that again is a requirement from NXK. Now the bonnet on this car is certainly not the standard MGB bonnet, because it is more like the MGC bonnet, which has more space underneath. But also, it's made out of polyester. And the reason why the bonnet is made out of polyester is to reduce the weight of the curb. So the lighter the car, the more power, the faster you become. The bonnet is held in place in the front with these latches. So you can remove those and then you can lift the bonnet off. This has to be in place because you have to remove the standard locking mechanism on the bonnet according to the regulation, because you have to be able to open up very quickly the bonnet in case of an accident, and with the standard locking mechanism that could block the opening of the bonnet. Overall, the bonnet is in a fairly good state, but it has some damage here in the front. Not that it's that important for racing, but this is something I like to clean up, and we'll fix that bonnet because we're going to respray the car anyway. The car should also have a tow position both in the front and in the back. So let's take the bonnet off and see how it looks like. It's kind of funny when I said like I can save money now because I have the tow ribbons, but reality is you don't save any money with a race car, you always spend money. So let me take this off. So we move it up. And the hinges in the back already been disconnected. So they've built a car with the wide body fenders, and these are polyester fenders both in the front and in the back. And I have a magnet here, see? It doesn't stick to it, so that's always a good check with a magnet. This is full of polyester and you can actually feel that. Again, to save weight. Also in the back we have the wide body fenders, and again this is all polyester. The magnet doesn't stick. The doors, on the other hand, those are still steel, so they did not change the doors, which is okay. Although the doors are from steel, they did cut out pieces in order to save weight again, and they have removed the whole rolling mechanism for the window. And in the back we have the rear bonnet, and this is one with a spoiler, so this is not the original bonnet for sure. It's locked in place with these springs and with some locks on the top. Just like the front bonnet, so now we can take this off very easily, and it's also full polyester. So let's remove that rear bonnet. So let's see if we can get this bonnet off. And this is very, very lightweight. See guys, this is actually also polyester with a plexiglass in it. So this is plexiglass, again, to save weight. All windows have been removed and replaced with plexiglass. So the side windows, even the windows in the doors, and the window in the rear boot lid. Except the front window, that is still the original tempered glass. That little handle right here is a power interrupter connected to the main breaker. So you have to be able to pull it from the outside, and you have to have the proper sign up. It has a filling cap, which has been moved from the back to the side of the car. And it has a locking mechanism, again, which is required for the class this car is going to run in. The cap on the side connects to this hose, which is going down to the fuel tank. But in this class I'm going to race in, this is more than good enough, and it's adequate. And the hose really looks in a pretty good condition, so I don't need to worry too much about it. It has a full roll cage, which is in a good condition. It is welded into place, and that's what it should be. And it covers the roof, it goes all around, comes back down in the front, and we even have lower support, so it's pretty well protected, the car. So this is good. I'm going to give you a little bit of a close-up, but before we do so, I want to point out a few more things which are important to check if you're going to buy a race car. So while you're inspecting the car, have a look on all these chassis members and in the different areas, but also the floor pans, and see if they have not been straightened up or if they are not bent, because that would indicate that the car had already once a serious crash. Now this car doesn't have any of that. I looked all around and I haven't seen anything that could point to a possible crash. Besides the roll bar, there's another strengthening position between the inner wheel arches from the left to the right with this thick bar, and that still looks quite alright as well. So really, I think this bodywork looks pretty good. So here we have the roll bar, which is going all around the roof and then comes all the way down, back down in the front of the car, and finally hits the floor pan. And as you can see, it's been welded there, but the welds are not looking all that great, but they are solid, and there's even an enforcement plate on the bottom. And that kind of brings us to the inside of the car. And as you can see, the doors are very minimalistic, right? So the normal paneling has been removed, replaced with an aluminum panel. The inner working for the windows are being removed, and all the handles are being removed except this little latch here, which is now back on, and they still kept the locking mechanism because you still have to be able to close the doors. So if you look on the dashboard, it's really simplified and totally been replaced by a lightweight substitute. Over here you still have that breaker switch, and remember that little pull handle I showed you on the outside? Well, that's the one that's going to pull off the power on this car whenever it's necessary. So now it's on, and if you pull it from the outside, it's going to break the power. We have a FIA approved fire extinguisher on the car. I'm just checking on the dates. Let's see, it's still valid until 2023, so we are good. It's a 3.5 liter one. I'm going to change this one out, although it's still good, because it's a manual one. So I'm going to move it to the back of the car, and then I'm going to plumb that in with some tubing, so I have a nozzle going into the footwells left and right of the car, but also two nozzles inside the engine bay, and I probably will go for the electrical activation system and not the manual one. So we have a 4-speed synchro gearbox. I'm not sure if this is a closed ratio gearbox or not. I hope so, and if not, we might put closed gearing in, and probably with the straight teeth, so that's a bit stronger. So I probably will modify this, so I have larger dials sitting right here, so I'm going to extend the dashboard down, put the switch up here, and then have a larger water temperature meter. Those two can remain, and also I might want to have a oil temperature meter as well. So here we got an RPM meter from VDO, which is a good quality RPM meter, but it is really very small and sitting on the side, and RPMs are so critical when you're racing. We got a big red light on the side, which is actually indicating that you're hitting the maximum RPM, which is set around 6,500, so never go above that one. So let's see what happens that red light should go on as soon as I turn on the contactor. And you can hear actually the fuel pump start pumping up. And as you notice, they also modified the steering column. Steering wheel looks pretty good, and I don't see a lot of play on it, but it would be better if it was a removable steering wheel. We also got a fairly big mirror on the top, which we have a total view of what happens behind us. So the racing harness looks like fairly new, and it seems like it's been still approved, so that's good. The seat itself is like brand new or very recent. It's an OMP race seat, and it has a full racing harness, so no expenses to be done on this. Okay, so that looks good. It has still the seal on it, so of approval from FIA. So it's only good until 2023, but that's okay. All right, it works. So far we've been looking on the outside of the car and at the inside of the car. We know we have lots of polyester parts on the car, which is good to reduce the weight on the car, like the fenders and the bonnets. We also know that the windows have been replaced with plexiglass, and these are all good things because it means the guy who prepared this car really made his homework. At the inside we have a full-fledged roll bar welded into place We've got a full-fledged race seat with racing harness. We even got a fire extinguisher. That's manual, so that's something I'm going to change. I'm going to plumb that in. So that's one thing with an electronic activation. So that's one. I might also change the fuel tank. I'm not sure yet. And we will rearrange the dials, and I'm certainly going to get a bigger RPM meter because that RPM meter is too small. And if you do race with cars, RPMs is what you drive on. It is not the mileage, it's not the speed, it's the RPM that counts. But we haven't looked at the engine, so now let's have a look on the engine, and then we'll look underneath the car, we'll look on the suspension, we'll look on the brakes and the tires. But first of all, the engine. It is hard to tell what has been modified on this engine, but we know it has been modified because we developed 150 horsepower. We do have an aluminum radiator. We have a Rovotec fan, which is controlled from the inside. And we do have a DCOE 40 or 45 Weber carburetor made in Italy with some trumpets on it. And we have a, what is that? A Canon intake manifold. I think this is a slightly modified one. We also got the sports exhaust, but I'll come back to that, guys, don't worry. But I noticed as well that we have a major spill tank here, and that's necessary to take all the oil from the breather into this tank, and the surplus cooling liquid that expands needs to go into this can. But this is an ugly can, so that's something to look at. For the rest, it has a standard alternator, I think. It has the normal spark plugs, and I think it has a race distributor because it doesn't have any vacuum, probably a race coil and an electronic ignition. So let's have a bit of a deeper look onto this engine, how all this is fitted together. We have a really nice cooling radiator here, which is built for racing, and it's aluminum. And that is good because it has a far better cooling efficiency than copper. But they are a little bit weaker. But then again, weight is really what counts in racing. We got the Rovotec fan on this, but there's only one on it. I think I might change that to basically two. One on that side and one on the other side. And then I might add a sensor in the hose to trigger these fans. So we got a pressurized cap of 1.1 and an overflow. We don't have an expansion tank, I noticed, which is a bit weird, but I might put that in. So we got a 45 DCOE carburetor, and this is a Italian one. That's important. Never buy Weber carburetors that are made in Spain because they're a piece of shit. Sorry that I say it like this, but it's a reality. We got proper linkage on it. That's good. And we got some trumpets on the outside. These are fairly short trumpets, and that's good because short trumpets are good to enhance power in the upper RPMs. Longer trumpets, they are better for mid-range and high RPMs. So because we're going to run on the track, you're going to run in high RPMs, you want to have short trumpets. I don't know what we have in terms of jetting inside this carburetor, but we'll check that out. The hoses look quite all right. I might actually change those with some stainless steel braided hoses. We've got an intake manifold from Canon. And I need to check what that is, but it looks like it's something that has been modified. I can see that on the welds here. So most likely they tuned that intake manifold to the head, but we'll only see that when we take this apart. I also noticed that the carburetor is properly mounted on these flexible mounts, because that's critical for a Weber carburetor. So they did a good job on that. I'm not too sure about the intake manifold, how good that is. And one leg actually is feeding two cylinders. And now you're going to get a little bit of the robbing effect, right? There's no vacuum on this, and there's something about vacuum on race cars. You don't need vacuum advance. Vacuum advance is really needed if you're going to start cruising on the highway. So then your gas throttle is really closed almost, so your mixture is very lean. And then you need a bit more advance to ignite that. And that's why you have a vacuum. So if you're cruising along on the highway, your gas throttle or your butterfly is closed almost, or a little bit open. So you have a lot of vacuum inside the intake manifold. And then with the little hose that's on it to your distributor, you advance that. Now in the race car, that is different. You're always going to go almost wide open. You know, you're never going to cruise. So if you're going to wide open, you don't want to have that extra advance because it's going to screw up your engine. So that's why you don't have an advance on race engines. Now don't take it off on your street car because that doesn't make sense. That really helps you. A lot of people take it off because they think it's going to improve performance on the road car, but it doesn't. All right, so yeah, so one more thing about these intake manifold. The longer the necks are, right, these legs, the better that is for higher RPMs because you really get a lot of nice air pressure inside or airflow. The shorter they are, the better it is for lower RPMs power. All right, so this is a pretty poor spill tank. Now you need to have a spill tank or a catch tank so that you don't drop oil or cooling liquid on the racetrack, but this is really, you know, pretty poor. So, but again, this is easy to be replaced and easy to build, a nice aluminum tank. So this is what we're going to do. So it looks like the engine has been prepared by ARP, which is a good brand, so especially they're selling these studs here. But I will take the valve cover off just to have a look inside what they have done, because I don't know what they've done with the cylinder head. It is certainly not a cross-flowed cylinder head because both exhaust and intake are on the same side. If you have a cross-flowed cylinder head, then you have intake on one side and exhaust on the other side. So I'm kind of stuck on this cylinder head with Siamese ports. And Siamese ports is where two cylinders share the same intake port. And that is sometimes a problem because one cylinder will steal mixture from the other one. So you get kind of a robbing of mixture and air and gas, which can be a problem. All right, so let's have a look inside what we have. And I don't know. Well, I see already one good thing. I see rollers. So let me open this up and then we can have a check. Let's take the valve cover off. I already undid the bolts. And this is nice. So these are what we call rollers, and these are replacement parts for the standard rockers that you would normally have. And they have like these little wheels here, and they are really good onto the stems of the valves, because otherwise with the rockers you tend to move the valve back and forth a bit, you know, because when it comes down it moves back and forth, especially on higher RPMs and high lifting cams that I have inside. So I suspect that the camshaft inside this engine is a high lifting competition cam. In fact, I kind of know it because I can hear it when the engine is running. It runs very rough on idle, but it runs great on high RPMs, and that's typical for that kind of a cam. I also noticed that we have the race or the competition springs inside, spring inside, and there's a spring outside. So this is really good, and it still looks all right. I don't see nothing wrong with that. So yeah, we'll see. I think I will do a compression test now and see how much compression this engine has. I don't know in the back if there's a light flywheel on it or not, if there is a racing clutch in it or not. This is all stuff we will have to check later. But for now, let's do a compression test. We might want to check the electrodes on the spark plug to see what kind of color they are. So that gives another indication if we're burning oil or if the mixture is right or too lean or too rich. But of course, this is a race engine, so it's probably going to be very rich, as you can see. This is black. That's too rich, of course. So let's check this spark plug out. Yeah, it is, well, it's a little bit better, but it's still fairly dark. Of course, after a race, they may look completely different. And we still have an engine number on it, so that's also good. I'm going to try to look inside the cylinders a bit to see what the situation is. And this is kind of an endoscope, so I'm going to put it inside one of the cylinders and then see what we have. So with this tool, I can actually look inside the cylinder and see what happens. And I'm trying to look on the cylinder head sides and see how good they are. And I think they still look quite all right. You see this kind of cross marking on it? That's what they call honing. So they don't seem to be too bad. But the pistons are the flat type, that's for sure. I'm very curious to see what this compression ratio will be. And here is my dial. So hopefully you can see it if I place it here. If you're going to do the compression test, do it with full throttle. That should be good enough. Wow, 13 kilograms, that's good. So this is pretty high compression. So I'm going to do this for each and every cylinder, and then we'll know. So I tested all 4 cylinders, and number 1 is good, 14, 14, 14. But number 3 is stuck at around 12 kilograms. So that's a little bit of loss. That could be a valve problem, whatever. It could be a little bit of wear and tear on the pistons. That's something probably to be checked whenever I'm going to take the head off. But not right now, although it's still good enough, but I shouldn't have that difference between them. Race cars don't have a choke, and it's around 3-4 degrees centigrade in the barn, as you can tell, right? So let's see if we can get it started and keep it running until it's warm. Well, I can hear backfires in the exhaust, and I can hear spitting in the carburetor. So there is a little bit of work to be done on this car. Initially, the engine was running pretty rough, but we had good compression. So the carburetor is not adjusted. I did a few little adjustments on the carburetor, not a lot, and I also adjusted the timing a little bit. We're probably going to need new spark plugs, but now the engine starts up and it actually runs fairly okay. It's still not as smooth as I want to have it. After that little adjustment, now the engine starts up fairly quickly. Which is something I didn't got before. So by just tweaking a little bit on the carburetor and on the ignition, we got this car to run a hell of a lot smoother already. So that really shows that this car has been sitting there for quite a while. But the most important part is it does not overheat, it has the right compression, it has good oil pressure, and the rest is just a matter of adjustments. So I'm going to have a quick cup of coffee, and then we'll have a look underneath on the car, how the bodywork looks like. We'll have a look on the suspension, on the brakes, and on the exhaust system. I think I need to clarify something. When we started up the engine the first time, it had a lot of backfire and it didn't really run too well. It sounded like it was running on 3 cylinders. And the backfire is really because of too much fuel which is still in the exhaust, and then it explodes. It was also sputtering a bit, so this was really not good. So I checked very quickly the ignition system, and I found out with the stroboscope light that the first cylinder was not firing. And then of course you get all this fuel in the exhaust because it's not burned, and then it explodes. So that was the reason for that. I actually then took apart the distributor, and I checked out if anything was broken inside, and it wasn't. But this is a optoelectric distributor, so no more breaker points, right? So it's like a little LED and a light receiver, and there's a plate going over that with gaps. The LED was a bit dirty, so I cleaned that up, and then finally I cleaned the spark plugs, I checked the spark leaks, put it all back together, and then I started it up, and then I had a spark. So I think the ignition system is pretty much gone. So I'm going to get a new ignition system on this car, probably a 123, which I can program. All right, so now let's have a look on the wheels. The rims are 15-inch, and normally you would find on an MGB 14-inch rims. And those are having an ET of 2.0, and the tires that we have on there are, in fact, they are 195s, 55 R15s. Now, if you look on the tires, you will notice that these are not normal tires. These are what we call semi-slicks, and they still look in a pretty good shape. So I have these tires both on the front and on the back, so I don't need to do much on these wheels besides the fact that I will certainly blast them clean and get them powder coated again. I have already taken off the wheels so we can actually see what we have in the back. And in the back right here we have what we call drum brakes. They look like fairly new, so I'm pretty pleased with that. They are fairly big, I think. I think they are bigger than normal, but I'm not sure. I probably would need to check, but I almost think they are bigger than the normal drum that you would find on an MGB GT. So let's take the front wheels off and see what the situation is with the brakes. Let's see, let's take it off. And we can see that we have actually a spacer, and that's to get the wheel further out. So in the front we've got disc brakes, and they still look very good. They are not really grooved at all, and they haven't been used. There's no edge or rim on it. So yeah, I don't think they are that old. Let's see the brake caliper, how that looks like. This hose is used to cool down the brakes, because you're not allowed to use vented discs in this class where I'm going to race in. So that's why you find original discs and original calipers. I might have to put up green brake pads, so that makes it a little bit more heat resistant, but that's what it is. So this pipe here takes air from the front. From the front valance there is an intake there, and it's cooling down actually the disc and the brake pads. I also noticed that they already have the stainless steel braided flexible hose pipes. That is good, because that's good stuff. I also noticed that they have new brake lines recently done. So I think this was done fairly recently. We also got a shock absorber here, and this is the traditional shock absorber. It's not a coilover, because that is not authorized, so you have to drive with the original shock absorbers. I will take them out, I will change the oil, and I might actually make it a little bit more hard by putting a couple of washers inside around the valve that's inside. But that's all for another video. This is the oil cooler, and that looks in a pretty good shape, and it can take air from the front. There's an opening here, and then it will blow through and cool the oil. So that is good. We also have, it looks like a brand new anti-roll bar, fairly thick. So that's good, with some massive aluminum support blocks. And here we got the wishbones, and they look to be in a pretty good shape. The downlinks are good. Steering house looks okay, and the subframe here is all right. I think they already have changed the bushings inside, because I can see some kind of white-green stuff here. So that is also looking quite all right. So the wishbones, there's probably nothing to be done on it. Also the upright seems to be okay. So yeah, I think the suspension is really in a good condition. There's not much we need to do about it. Maybe just clean it up, because I like to have things clean. And here you can see it. Here you can actually see it a little bit better, that they have these new bushings in on both sides. So I think the springs are probably upgraded springs, so they are kind of a bit lower down. But that's about it. So we've got the sports exhaust on it, and this is the big bore exhaust, and then you can see that here. So there's some springs over here to hold it together. They didn't put clamps up. Don't ask me why. This is something I don't know, because the engine is shaking a little bit because of this high lifting camshaft, the competition camshaft. For the rest, everything underneath this car looks pretty good. The gearbox doesn't leak. Oh, it's a little bit wet, but not a lot. It's just sweating a little bit. But the whole support structure looks really good. I think this has even been enforced, to be honest, and there's no rust underneath any of the chassis beams, which is always important on a MGB, that these outriggers are kind of clean. It looks like here they welded in some enforcement. Welding job isn't all that good, but okay, it sticks. So overall, I think the underneath looks good. The things to look for is to look for distortion or damage or repair that was done on any of those beams here. But in this car, it all looks good. We've got a hydraulic clutch, which is good. I don't know if it is a race clutch or not. I might want to try to have a look and peep inside and see what that is. But I'm certainly going to change the oil on it, and maybe I change the gearbox. What I don't know is if I have a light flywheel or not. That's something we need to find out. So also all the tubing is nicely put in place with the rubber protection, so that looks like a job well done. So the supports for the gearbox, well, I guess that one I will actually replace, because that's kind of a little bit worn, not a lot. And in the back of the car, we've got our facet fuel pump. So that's an electrical fuel pump. That is really good. Typically, you would have two of them for a race car. This only has one, but okay, I can add a second one if that was necessary. So the springs are the 5-blade springs, and I think these are the lowered version of it. So that is good. I'm not sure about this bolt here on this side. That should probably go in better with the bush. So I might change the bushes out on these springs. I don't know if they have been changed or not. A bit of a dirty welding job here, but that we can correct. And then there we have our magic bottle. This is another catch bottle that takes the overflow or the fumes or the oil from the differential. So the catch bottle, which sits over there, connects with a hose to the venting spot on your rear axle. So typically this is just a vent, but on the racetrack you can't have that. You have to catch any potential oil that could come out. The battery box is still underneath the car, so the battery is not in the car. The box has seen better days, and that again we'll repair this box for sure and make it look a bit better. And this is a suspension improvement part that is actually connected to the rear spring and then goes all the way back to the other side, locked into the chassis. So it's kind of holding that together because these springs are kind of a bit flaky sometimes. And then there's an adjustment rod going all the way back. So I think they did a pretty good job on that to improve the road holding or handling of this car. So I'm happy about that. And this is the rear shock. I have one on the left and one on the right. And they have to stay in because I'm not allowed to use normal shock absorbers. So that's part of the regulation on this class of racing. So I have no idea what the differential ratio is, but we can actually check it out by putting a few marks on the main drive and then on the wheels and see how many rotations I have to do. I don't know if we have a slip differential in it or a limited slip, but it looks like if I turn it that it's potentially a limited slip, but I am not convinced that's the case. So that's something we'll check once we open up the rear part of the differential and check it out inside. Let me place it like this, and I will mark it here as well so we know. And also going to make a mark on my wheel. I'm going to rotate the main drive shaft and see how many rotations the wheel will do versus the rotations of the main shaft. So if I do 2 rotations of the main shaft, then I have my wheels rotating 1 full circle. So this looks like a ratio of 1 to 2 or 2 to 1, depending how you want to express it. So the gas tank is underneath the car, and it's been installed not that long ago, and it doesn't look like it's an aluminum one. I think this is actually a steel one. Yeah, it is. It's my magnet, so it sticks. So it's not even stainless steel, but it might have been coated specially so that it cannot rust. Because I don't see any rust on it, so not quite sure what I'm going to do with it. I might remove it and put a new tank inside the cabin, a real race tank, or I keep this one. It all depends a bit. So I've shown you a few things on what you should check when you're going to buy a classic race car, but of course you should drive the car first of all, making sure that it drives straight, making sure that it brakes straight, that it accelerates straight, and then feel if there's any play anywhere. Maybe you have play on the bearings, maybe you have play on the suspension, maybe you have play on the steering house. These are all things you should try out before you buy it, so then you have a pretty good idea on how much it's going to cost. I would have shown you a road test, but it rains like hell already the whole day to show you on how you can check out if the car brakes straight or pulls up straight. And that's pretty simple. Drive on a straight line and then hold your hands off the steering wheel and then brake gently or even harder, and the car should brake in a straight line. The same thing for acceleration. And then you can corner with the cars left and right, very sharp, and you should not hear any weird sounds like grinding sounds or anything like that, because that could be an indication that the bearings are gone. So with this I will stop, and I will give you a little sum up now in the house of the total cost I might have on this car, because there's a couple of things I'm going to do. I'm also going to respray it and replace quite some parts, and I will sum that up in the house. I'll see you there. Bye. Now that we looked on the car, we can make up the total cost to get this car back on the track. Now, I'm going to do a whole bunch of stuff, Now you don't need to do all this because the car we looked at was almost racetrack ready. Not in full, there's still a bit of work to be done, but I will be doing some extra work. So on the outside I'm planning to have a paint job. And this is going to run about 500 euros or dollars. Now I'm going to paint it myself in my own paint booth, but the 500 euros is all about the paint, and it could be a little bit less, but I rather overestimated a little bit. So I'm also looking for new rims for the wheels, so new 15-inch rims, mini light. They run about 550 euros for 4 of them. And I want to fix on that new tires, so I want to have some rain tires on that. So that's going to be probably another 500 or 600 euros. And then I'm just going to rebuild my existing rims. I'm going to shot blast them and I'm going to powder coat them again and get them back to in its original condition. And that's probably going to run me about 50 euros because I'm going to do this work myself. So a lot of the work, if you can do it yourself, you can really get it down in price. I just need some extra paint to paint the car underneath, some black shiny paint, and that's probably about 100 euros. And then I want to have some proper stickers on the car because a race car needs to have stickers. So that's what I'm about to spend on the outside. And that adds up to about 1,750 euros. Now obviously you don't have to buy a second set of tires and rims, but if you're going to race, you want to have some for dry weather, some for wet weather. Now at the inside, I'm not going to do very much, but I'm still going to fix the fire extinguisher system. I'm going to plumb in a new system. Now that's going to run you around 800 euros. Now you could keep the manual fire extinguisher as well, but I want to have it extended in the engine bay and in the footwells. I also will add some additional dials. So we looked at a water temperature dial, an oil temperature dial, and maybe a speedometer. So I want to extend a little bit that console there. So I have a better view because the dials that are in there now are a little bit small. So if you do racing, you want to have a proper RPM meter that everything is very well visible. And I'm going to add most likely a removable steering hub. So all that will probably end up roughly at about, let's see, 1350. So that is the removable wheel hub, steering wheel hub, which is 250 more or less, and all the dials are like 300. Then we ended up on the engine. Now the engine, it's very hard to tell right now, but what I know for sure, based on what we have tested real quick, is that I'm going to change the ignition with a 123 programmable ignition, and that's around 380 euros. There's overall maintenance, that's probably around 100 euros, spark plugs, filters, you know, all that kind of stuff, fresh oil. I'm going to replace the spill tank, that plastic ugly tank, that was really not good, so I'm going to change that guy. That's probably around 50. I'm going to change some of the hoses, most likely, and make it look a bit more tight. That's about 100 euros. I'm probably going to put up a automatic fan system with an adjustable thermostat, but it's about 300 euros. I'm going to change out the oil pan, and I know I didn't talk about it, but the oil pan underneath this car is a steel pan. So I'm going to replace it with an aluminum pan, which is better for cooling for the oil, but also I'm going to have a baffle inside, so if you take corners, the oil doesn't get to one side, so you have no oil starvation on the engine. So that's another 350. And while I'm working on the oil system, I might as well upgrade the oil pump for higher RPMs, and that's going to be another 80. Now I don't know if the flywheel is a light flywheel or not. I suspect it is, and the good thing about the light flywheel is that it's going to let the engine rev up much faster because it doesn't have to overcome this heavy weight, the inertia of the flywheel. So that is a good thing to have, and this is around 400 euros. So I don't know, to be very honest, what's in the car. I think it's a light flywheel, but we'll only see that when we take it apart. So that is an extra cost that I'm not sure of if I will need to spend that money or not. Let's see what else. So for the engine, I'm looking at a total cost of about 1,400 euros. That's on the condition that there's nothing else wrong with the engine, but it doesn't look like it. It just looks like very badly aligned. The Weber carburetor, well, I have most of those parts, so that's not going to cost me much. For the gearbox, I think the thing I'm going to need is a new race clutch. It's always good to put a new one in. So a complete race clutch runs you about 400 to 500 euros. And I may decide to go to close ratio gears with straight teeth. They are very strong and they make an annoying sound or noise, but they are very good. But that is a very high cost. Rebuilding the gearbox, that's going to run me about 2,300 euros. So I'll put that aside. We'll see how it goes because the gearbox does shift properly, because I did drive the car, not today, but on another day when the weather was a bit nicer, not rainy like right now. So that will bring me for the clutch and the gearbox to about 400 euros. And then we have the suspension. So there's little to be done on the suspension. I will recondition the 4 shocks, and then we'll use for that new valves for that. That's 30 euros each, that's 120 euros. And that's about it. I don't think I really need new shocks. I'm just going to recondition them. So that's not too bad. So total 120 for the shocks. And then I'm going to change the bushes most likely on the rear springs. That's going to run me about 200 euros for all the polyurethane bushes for the suspension for the entire car. So all that is adding up to about 5,000 euros or $5,000, of which you probably could deduct half of it for things that are not really necessary to race again. So you could do this for 2,500 euros if you don't get the second set of tires and all these other nice things that I listed up. So hopefully now you have kind of an idea on how much it's going to cost to put a classic retired race car back onto the track. So it's still a lot cheaper than buying a complete racetrack ready car. Anyhow, I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in my next video, which will be most likely old rusty. Bye bye.